I think there's this myth that if you're smart enough, you can just start doing anything immediately without any help.
A lot of open source projects take off because their creators are excellent marketers.
And they don't really realize that what they're doing is marketing.
You tend to think that you just need people contributing code and building the product, but you actually need community,
A vision,
marketing,
product management.
a roadmap. You often see people who are burning out because they were doing all these things when their passion was really coding.
Hi, I'm Paul Bigger, founder of Circle CI.
I'm Edith Harba, CEO and co-founder at LaunchDarkly.
And you're listening to Be Continuous, a podcast about continuous delivery and software development.
You can get in touch with us anytime at our Twitter handle @ContinuousCast.
The show is brought to you by Heavybit. To learn more, visit heavybit.com. And while you're there, check out their library, home to great educational talks from other developer company founders and industry leaders.
All right, so we're talking open source again. And I think specifically what we're looking at is when you've got some open source project and you tend to think that it's just coders that you need. You just need people contributing code back and building the product, but you actually need a lot more. And you had a specific story about this, Edith.
Well, I have a couple. So we had Armin on a few episodes ago. Armin, who was the co-founder of HashiCorp, brilliant guy. And he was talking about how much marketing had gone into getting their first open source projects off the ground.
Yeah, of course.
Like that initially, and everybody should go listen to the episode because Armin is brilliant, but he was talking about how they initially got 100 downloads. Mm-hmm. Not per day, not per month.
A total.
Per year. Mm-hmm. And there was so much work of them going around to meetups and talking about the project and basically being marketing.
Yeah.
And then also pretty recently, I was at an event and I was talking to a guy who was on an open source committee, and his open source committee was community. Mm-hmm. And I said, what does that do? And he's like, if people are disagreeing, we're the arbitrators. So I'm like, so you've basically recreated HR. Mm-hmm. That there needs to be a source of truth or a source of reconciliation if people are not getting along, which is sometimes not technical, but sometimes just personality.
Yeah. I think certainly in the marketing one, I think one of the things that you see a lot of open source projects take off because their creators are excellent marketers. Sometimes you see the same thing with a startup that you have someone who is a great writer, who's like 20,000 Twitter followers, who's got a popular blog or something along those lines, and then they build something, and because they have this built-in distribution channel, that something goes somewhere.
Yeah, and they don't really realize that what they're doing is marketing. Right.
And I mean, as we know, engineers hate marketing, and they hate being marketed too.
Yes, but they love to tweet.
Engineers love being marketed to. They just don't know it.
When you were at Mozilla, how did you see them breaking up their open source project?
Well, Mozilla had such a large distribution channel because it had been going for so long, and it was one of the original things. So I don't think Mozilla really lacked for marketing. And in fact, a lot of the things they did just by posting on their blog would automatically get to the top of Hacker News and would get people discussing them. They did PR quite well. So I don't think Mozilla lacked for marketing at all.
And I think then people don't realize how much marketing they had. And they think that they could just start an open source project and PR happens.
Yeah. So I had an open source project back in the day. It was a PHP compiler. And we did extremely limited marketing, but the very, very small amount of marketing that we did had a tangible effect. So this was pre-Twitter and was just a little too late on the open source side of things. So we'd posted on SourceForge and FreshMeat, and this is like 2005. And we were just sort of over the hill, but still all the same on those. They got tons of people just checking it out, downloading it, installing it, etc. And I mean, just that was an act of marketing and finding users.
How did that make you feel?
I mean, I don't think I identified it as marketing at the time.
Oh no, but were you happy that people were using?
Oh yeah. I mean, so actually, I remember an argument with the other people on the project that I eventually convinced them, where we were arguing about licensing. And so it was originally a GPL project, and I convinced them to switch it to BSD. And the reason being that we wanted people to use it, and I felt that the GPL restricted people from being able to use it. And the argument is what if Apple came along? Apple was in the compiler world. Apple was the big baddie that GCC was trying to stop from appropriating their software. What if Apple came along and built a closed source product around it? And I was like, That sounds great. I'd love to have so many people using our software. I think that convinced them. So apart from marketing, and you mentioned community management, I think community management is one of those things that people these days are often doing really, really well. There's a lot more people doing a really good job of this.
Who do you think does a good job of that?
So the Rust community, I think they were one of the first projects to adopt a code of conduct. I remember reading some posts by Graydon on their mailing list. That's Graydon Hoare, who was the original Rust author designer, where someone would post something and they were just being a dick about it. And Graydon would answer their question, but he would immediately start by saying, we don't discuss in this way, and sort of correct their behavior, and then continue the conversation on. In a way that wasn't excessively confrontational at all, but it made clear what was acceptable and what wasn't acceptable in the community.
Yeah, I think that's a smart way to do it.
Yeah, I joined a Slack recently.
People still do that?
People do still Slack groups. I don't like them, but I joined one.
I thought peak Slack was 2016.
I thought it was peaking last year, but yeah, I'm certainly getting the impression that people are, for open source projects, having a Slack where you can't search what people have said before. If Slack fixed that, I think that Slack would continue to be used for open source communities.
But you can search.
There's a 10,000 user limit if you don't pay.
If you don't pay.
Or 10,000 message limit.
Yeah, if you don't pay.
Yeah.
So you can search, it's just you have to.
Yeah, but if typically you're going into certainly an open source project Slack to find out the answer to your question. So you want to search for the answer to your question. And this is why I think I was reading today some community that's moving to Ghost, right?
Yeah.
Move to Discourse.
Yep.
And I've used a bunch of discourses. They're typically discuss something, like the OCaml one, the Elm one. Like they're really, really good.
Yeah, I mean, so Slack also makes threading very hard.
It does, and
like they tried to put it in, just it's hard.
I mean, you need to bake that in from the start.
Yeah.
So we've got marketing, we've got community management. I think the thing that's mostly missing from open source is product management. And we talked about this in the episode where we had Adam Gross on, and it's just like people don't design what they want their software to do. People have changed logs but no roadmaps.
Well, like GitLab has published a roadmap.
GitLab is a company though.
Yeah.
I think companies that are built around open source are excellent at this because they have a company to build. They have a place that they're going.
So you're making a distinction between open source communities and open source companies.
I'm really thinking of like, you start a new open source project today, or you just like a public repo on GitHub.
Yeah.
And you want people to use it. You want it to turn into something. I mean, maybe it's unspoken, but you're not really doing any of the activities that would actually make that work. And then if you do start to take off, that you're still not doing any of the activities unless there's some amount of commercial stuff around it. So like Rails, for example, while 37 Signals wasn't excessively, like they weren't making money directly off Rails, but they were still making a lot of money in various ways off the fact that they were the creators of it.
And then there's just pure, I'd say, stuff like the ones that are most relevant to us right now are, I'd say, Go from Google.
Yeah.
Because we were actually built on Go. Mm-hmm. And we don't use it, but it's interesting to us because it's adjacent. Istio.
Which one
Istio, I don't know if you're following it all.
I don't know
well, there's kind of two rival standards. Depending on who you talk to, rival or complementary. Mm-hmm. Istio and Envoy, which are this idea of a service mesh.
And what are they not appropriately putting out roadmaps, or what's the connection here?
Oh, just they're not trying to charge money. They're just big companies trying to push these kind of open source projects.
Right. Okay. Sort of like Kubernetes.
Yeah.
Except Kubernetes has a roadmap.
Yep.
Yeah. I think anything that really has a large company behind it, like large companies know how the sausage is made.
Perhaps too vividly.
Yeah. There's a lot of open source things that are about engineers only, who only value engineers. And they don't value designers, they don't value technical writers, they don't value marketers, community managers, all the things that make a project into like something really successful and useful to lots of people.
Well, I mean, to loop back to a prior episode, they could be what turns a project into product.
Sure. And whether you think product as commercial or not, it's like a non-commercial open source, but a product.
Yeah. whether or not you should be able to understand it just by spending enough time with it versus valuing technical writing and onboarding, like, that people will want some degree of hand-holding to start to use it. And I don't mean hand-holding in at all a negative way.
Sure. The sort of way a good like sales engineer might help their customer onboard.
Yeah, I think there's this myth that if you're smart enough, you can just start doing anything immediately without any help.
Yeah. Similar, the myth that the project founders or the engineer who wrote it can do all these things.
Yeah.
And then you often see people who are burning out because they were doing all these things when their passion was really coding.
Yeah. Or just like something I try to have a lot of empathy is that everybody can be very smart, but in different ways. And you need to give them a lot of hand-holding in a very positive way the first time they try anything.
Yeah.
I'm going to go on a metaphor, but then I'll come back. The first time I tried to use clip-on bike shoes, have you ever biked with them?
This is quite some metaphor. No, I've not used them. They scare me.
They scared me too. And then I was biking cross-country, and I really needed to start using them. And I'm a smart person, and I started biking, and it was really hard to get used to them. And it was just something that I needed practice and hand-holding on. And there's a lot of things where it's like, okay, you can have a very capable person, but their first encounter with something, maybe they need technical documentation. Maybe they need a wizard. God forbid a wizard, but like maybe they need a quick start or a tutorial.
So it's interesting. One of the large projects that I have a lot of experience with is the PHP project.
Yep.
So I haven't written too much PHP, but for several years I was involved in the project in various ways. And one of the things that really allowed people to get involved in PHP, and I think they really like pioneered this, is that all of their documentation had a comment section at the bottom. And this was before there was a Stack Overflow, but like you just had hundreds of like comments with people being like, here's a way to do this. Here's a way I use this function to do this. It was really the Stack Overflow of its day.
But politer.
I'm sorry?
I hope politer.
No, I mean, it wasn't great.
Okay.
Yeah, it was the Wild West of commenting, and I'm sure there were people calling each other idiots and that sort of thing. And this is like the late 90s, early 2000s.
Side note, like Ev Williams just gave a talk, and he was trying to defend Twitter, and he's like, oh, this whole uncivility thing is this very recent thing. And I'm just like, what?
No.
Have you been on like Usenet? Like,
yeah.
Like you don't need GIFs to have a flame war. You just need ASCII.
Yeah. The September that never ended.
Yeah, I thought it was a very inaccurate thing for him to say that his literal quote was only the cool people used to be on.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
On the internet, so we were all very polite. I was just like, no.
No. Only the cool people. I feel like the internet was initially populated by people who were absolutely uncool in almost every way.
Well, that's what I mean. I think that was like, he was like, it was only the geeks, the nerds, and I say this as a geek and a nerd myself, so we were all polite. I was like, no.
God,
You had this veil of you could type stuff and people would flame.
Yeah. Large open source project that has this exact problem is the Linux project.
Well, it starts from the top.
In that case, it definitely starts from the top. Every other project, like, thinking about Rust, where the opposite comes from the top. The invaders come in and they act like they have learned from other projects and like they've learned from Linus. And they have to be individually repelled.
Yeah, it's funny. The closest I've come is I moderated a mailing list for a while.
Oof.
And just the level of, and this was in 2007, 2008, just people forget that there are humans on the other side.
Yeah. Well, it's very easy to forget. It's just a text box.
Yeah.
One of the best things when I started using Intercom, the best thing about it was that you saw the human. And I got this as well.
Or the avatar.
Well, the avatar, the human, but you got this as well.
It's usually not that person. I hate to break your bubble.
I mean, I understand that, but they saw my picture, right? And they're like, "Oh, this is another human." You got the same thing with Reportive.
Yeah.
When you're writing to someone and you see their picture alongside, it's like, "Oh yeah, this is a human who has a a company that they work at and a Facebook profile and whatever else is in the information." But like, there's a photo and you see who they are. And that they are, in fact, a person.
Yeah, it's not, this is a person who has feelings, motives, their own stuff going on in their life. It's not just a punching bag.
One of the best things about GitHub is emoji. Because it's one of these things that you didn't have in the old text days. You didn't have when you were sending patches to a mailing list. There was no way to really humanize your message.
I think emojis can be so open to interpret. So I do agree that they're a step up, but they can be open to massive interpretation.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you stick to the smiley face as I do,
Your repertoire has not widened since
it's really not very wide at all. People are sending me Bitmoji, and I'm just like, I don't understand.
Do you ever go for like the winky one or the thumbs up?
Sure, maybe a winky emoji, a winky face, a thumbs up, maybe a heart. Only the red one, obviously. There's other color ones. There's a heart with sparkles on it.
That's not you.
No, not at all.
Well, so you have your own, I'm assuming, Slack for your company.
Yes.
Have you started developing your own emojis yet?
No, and I think the Slack for our company is very underused. So we followed your suggestion. Our general room is now called the dark room, and the random is called the light room.
Oh, I thought I actually recommended the reverse, but okay.
Okay. Well, dark is a good thing for our company.
Yeah, and thank you for wearing your
my Launch Darkly t-shirt.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Oh. So your Slack isn't very used at your company?
Well, so there's 5 of us, and then we're all in the same room.
Yeah.
And deliberately so. After the last company being very remote, we focused very hard on in-person interactions because we're inventing a new language, we're inventing a new technology. It's hard to do that without a high bandwidth communication.
It's funny because my co-founder John and our first 2 engineers came out of Atlassian, which has HipChat.
Yeah, of course.
So we used HipChat, and they would converse exclusively over HipChat.
And they're sitting next to each other.
Yeah, to the point where like whenever we hired somebody, they would be a little freaked out because they'd be like, "You all never talk." And I'm like, "No, we're talking constantly."
Yeah. Well, there's so much value to asynchronous communication. Like I have notifications turned off on my machine, that allows me focus on actually like coding stuff, which is my job at the moment. I guess when my job changes to much more management and leadership and all that sort of thing you're supposed to do, I think I'll probably have to turn the notifications back on.
Yeah, well, to bring it back to open source, though, so we are very, very reliant on chat.
On chat, yeah.
But there will come a point when I'm like, hey, like, let's get on the phone if we're not in the same place, or let's
in an open source project.
No, at our own company.
Yeah.
I'm just like, hey, this is
right. Exactly.
It's like we are losing too much. We're getting in some sort of disagreement. I think if we just stood up and talked.
Yeah. Well, I did this when I was at Mozilla. I was involved in trying to increase contributor engagement. And I think one of Mozilla's great weaknesses is that it never focused enough on contributor engagements and sort of cannibalized its contributor community. But there was a point at which we were working on initiatives for first people to come in. The new users trying to like solve a bug, get involved in some way. And one person was like, oh, we could do this, and someone else was like, oh, we could do this instead, and someone else like, we could do this. And just like the scope of what we were doing ratcheted up massively. And then all the people who were talking about it started going off and implementing their own ideas and going in their different directions. And so you had like 5-6 people doing their own things instead of one, unified effort, which actually, and so I had to get on the phone with people. I had to be like, listen, there's, we could do that, we could do this, they're all great ideas, but like, we have to prioritize. And
I think it's interesting. I think that there's value in different types of communication that people don't always understand.
I mean, voice is such a powerful communication method. But
I try to reserve it for times that need voice.
I mean, I think there's very few situations where you wouldn't gain benefit from voice.
Well, so here's a real one. Like, so we're hiring and we have a recruiter. Yeah. So there's 2 people that always want to talk. Recruiters, real estate brokers.
Okay.
And it's just like, they're like, hey, I just want to check in. I'm just like, why don't you just send me an email?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, they're literally like, I just want to check in and how you're feeling about this. I'm like, has anything changed since we talked 3 days ago? They're like, no, I just want to check in. I was like...
Are we talking about your real estate broker here?
Yes.
Yeah. I think one of the great skills of sales, of which recruiting and real estate brokering are both that skill, is understanding what medium your user would enjoy better and is more beneficial for your user.
Yeah. But there is, I think, a great deal that is undervalued on talking to somebody on their phone.
For sure. And I think I've overvalued it a little bit. I said voice is always good, but with text, you do get a record of it. You do get people seeing what has happened. I know during incidents like, SRE incidents and outages and that sort of thing, having everyone type everything, every thought into a chat room makes it much, much easier to do retrospectives, to do, the blog posts that you have to do afterwards, et cetera, et cetera.
The key, though, is to force people to admit when they don't understand something.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So if somebody writes a line like, I'm trying to think of a hypothetical incident, we don't think many people will be affected by this.
Okay, right.
And then you need to call them out. Like, what does not many mean?
Right.
Because everybody's idea...
They're like, I know, 50,000, something like that. And you're like, what?
Or they could be like, it could be as many as 5 or as few as 2.
Great.
Yeah. So it is a very good medium where you have this record of like everybody's definition of not many or few or small.
The challenge that you have with this sort of communication in open source is that you have so many people who have no shared language, I guess.
Yep.
And very little sense of
the cultural norms.
Cultural norms of how to have a discussion together.
Yeah.
So like one thing that I'll often do, someone asks me a question, and my first thing in the vast majority of cases is, what are your goals? Like, what are you trying to do? I'm not sure I've ever seen anyone on the internet say, what are your goals? Like, think of a Hacker News conversation. It's like, the first thing they'll be like, you're doing it wrong. Here's how you're supposed to do it. And I'm like, what are your goals? What are you even trying to do here? And then once we have a shared understanding of goals, then we can actually discuss, the implementation, the solution, whatever it is that you're proposing.
I was going to talk about one area of the internet where people are sometimes explicit about their goals, which was online dating.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like, people can be very explicit.
Yeah. And that's a great one. You want people to be explicit about their goals.
Yeah.
Nothing like seeing something very exciting and then, getting to the date or whatever. And then you're like, oh, we're looking for completely different things. And I've wasted 2-3 hours of my time figuring out this, that could have been done much, much earlier.
Yeah. Like, I want to have somebody who will go play pinball at this bar and who,
Yeah.
So that's a case where people can be very, very specific.
Mm-hmm. You're an online dater, Edith?
No.
Hypothetically, what is your favorite online dating app?
It's gone.
It's gone. Did they just shut it down? It was Grindr. I heard they sold it.
Come on, I'm not on I'm not. No, they shut down Craigslist.
Oh.
Did they really shut down Grindr?
No, they sold it, but then there was a huge data leak a couple of days ago.
Yeah, that was not good.
Oh. All right, where were we? Open source projects.
I think people underestimate the value of being very specific sometimes.
Yes, right. So you have some sort of goal, right? You have a pull request, and someone comes up and they say on the pull request, I think you should do X instead, or you should do Y instead. And occasionally you'll get people being like, I think your approach doesn't solve this, or, has this side effect or whatever. But it's so rare to have people saying, stepping back and being like, here are the goals of what I was trying to achieve. Yeah,
I actually, not an open source per se, but I try to do that a lot when I'm trying to resolve a conflict in the company or the team. Mm-hmm. I'm like, hey, step up.
Yeah.
Like, let's back up for the situation. Like, what's happening? Why are we having this conflict?
Yeah.
Because usually there's always two answers to everything. Mm-hmm. But it's like, okay, why are we disagreeing? Is it because we actually have different goals?
Yeah. And I think this is one of the reasons why compilers are very easy tools to have communities around.
Because it's very clear.
It's just everyone kind of knows, like, it's not supposed to crash. It's supposed to be extremely performance. It's supposed to generate fast code.
Yeah.
And so, like, any conversation starts with those shared norms, and then after that, there's disagreement about, I don't know, indentation and that sort of thing. But all that is trivial to do.
Yeah, I forget who we talked to, but they said the lower in the stack something gets, the more easy it is to open source.
That's interesting. So if you're trying to open source a
Linux,
product,
like OS, like Linux,
yeah,
like it's pretty clear what an OS needs to do.
The driver has to communicate with things, and
yeah. But as you move higher and higher up, it gets harder and harder to open source it. Like, if you try to open source, I'll even say like a car.
Yeah.
There's still a lot of disagreement about what does a car look like.
Even like trivial seeming products. So let me pick Intercom as an example.
Yeah.
Intercom isn't trivial seeming, but like in the early days, it would have been fairly straightforward what it did.
It's just a chat.
Right. It's just a chat plus some sort of messaging and maybe some triggers. But trying to do that, like trying to steer a group of people who have no shared ideals about what the product is going to be into like what Intercom is today, it's not possible whatsoever.
Yeah. I think the more novel or new or up for variation something is, the harder and harder and harder it is to open source. And I'm not saying that open
source
source
is a shared direction.
Yes.
And you need ownership of the components that lead to that direction.
Yeah.
And ownership, I don't necessarily mean in like the owner's file or something like that, but like accountability. Someone has to be accountable for getting it, for getting their part of the project in that direction. Yeah,
I mean, not to go all memey, but have you seen the internet meme like you had one job?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like sometimes you just got to do one thing.
Yeah. So if you pick, some random open source project, let's say, Docker is a wonderful example here because there's so many competing interests in the Docker ecosystem.
Oh, so many.
So when you started with this, it's a containerization format with a file system hackery that makes it really fast and this nice Docker file.
Yep.
Right? But then you've got
Red Hat, you've got VMware.
They all have their own things that they're trying to do to it. They're trying to make it important in their ecosystem. They're trying to make their ecosystem important to it. And then you've got all these companies who are trying to own a little part of the Docker space. And that's exactly what Kubernetes was trying to do. So Kubernetes was trying to own the orchestration side of things with Google's goal of competing with AWS and all that sort of thing. Meanwhile, Docker is trying to own their own share of it. And they're trying to introduce Swarm and they've got Compose to try and wrest control and try to own the entire ecosystem. They're trying to do everything in every single direction. So every time a company starts up that's doing something useful, it's like Docker doesn't want to let that get away from them in case that becomes the useful thing.
Well, like Core OS.
Yeah, exactly. So you end up with this like huge fragmentation in the system and this huge amount of wasted work because everyone is trying to drag it kicking and screaming in the direction that suits them best.
Yeah, well, I mean, so we started off by saying an open source community was just people benevolently contributing code.
Yes,
and now we've morphed to it's corporations.
Yes, corporations fighting over who can be the most benevolent.
Benevolent?
Who can seem the most benevolent as they what are the words? Embrace, extend, extinguish. So there was a time when open source was not corporations.
Yeah, it was.
And if you're taking a Richard Stallman view of the world, and we should never have gotten into this open source thing, free software was the only right way of doing it.
Well, I just think that's funny because now we say, well, open source has basically become corporations trying to seize a standard.
Yeah. And I mean, it always was. Not necessarily trying to seize a standard, but like, no one's really doing this for the good of their health. I mean, we could argue that we like to build companies because we just like to build things. But there's many, many other goals that go along with that, regardless of how benevolent one might be.
I do think there are individual maintainers who are really just doing it because they care about it.
Mm-hmm. They're the ones who are getting burnt out first.
Yes, because they're not getting paid and they're getting basically screamed at by everybody.
Yeah. This reminds me of do you remember when we had
Nadia
and was it Sean Burns on that episode? Nadia Iqbal. And like the idea, and I think that there have been many, many iterations of this, and probably Patreon is the only one that's actually working, is that open source people should get paid for their contributions. Oh, you look unhappy with this idea.
I think they should, but I think then there's this myth that I should just get paid to do whatever I want.
Yes, I mean that is a problem with the idea, and the other problem with the idea is that there will always be people who want to do open source for whatever reason that they want to do it. And so there'll always be competition coming from people who are doing it for free. Yeah.
I think that was a good summary of open source morphing more into corporations, but there's still people who honestly believe in it.
Who believe in open source?
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. But like, what is the goal? No, I'm serious. Like when you say you believe in open source, like what do you believe that open source is? What is it for?
No, I said there are still people who believe in open source.
Oh, you don't believe?
I feel like you're trying to force me into an answer.
Well, so I'm thinking of a conversation I had. I got to meet Gerald Sussman, who's one of the guys who popularized Scheme and an MIT professor.
I actually learned Scheme when I was a kid.
Ah, you might have used his book.
Yeah, because I learned Scheme when I was like 10, 11. It was like the most useless language ever. I mean, no, it's basically a teaching language.
Right.
So I mean, it's good for learning, but you can't do anything.
So as well as being like, this fabled MIT professor, he's also on the board of the Free Software Foundation. And we spent an incredibly arduous hour arguing with each other. I mean, this was a complete waste of time for both of us.
More arduous than our podcasts?
It was just like this, this thing that started out as being like, discussing free software versus open source and so on. He's like, really in the Richard Stallman school of things. And my position was that, perhaps free software would have done better if it didn't have Richard Stallman as its figurehead. And he vehemently disagreed, and we were just starting at different places. And like his goal is like, free software. And my goal is like, well, I think, there should be software. People should build things and
but they should get paid for it.
I don't even think that. I don't think that they shouldn't get paid for it, but like when I produce open source software, I'm not there for the goal of getting paid for it.
Oh no, but I do mean that like if you have a corporation, you have an obligation to the people who are working for you to pay them.
Oh yes, that is important. People should have like roofs over their head and be able to feed their families, this sort of thing. We weren't disagreed on that.
Yeah, like I mean, I know our team believes in our mission, but I think they also show up every day because they get it.
They get paid.
Yeah.
So you're saying you do pay your team?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
There was that scandal about that company Plink.
Which one?
In Ireland.
Oh.
It was held up as this huge success because they'd raised $25 million in Series A.
What's it called?
Plink, Plynk.
Never heard of it. Okay, in Ireland?
In Ireland.
Okay. And they weren't paying people?
Well, it turned out that they announced this huge round of $25 million.
Yeah.
They were hiring people, and then they weren't paying them.
How did they convince them to come into the office?
I don't know.
I mean, there's this whole thing about, the unpaid interns and the people who can only afford to be unpaid interns because their family is already rich and this sort of thing.
Yeah. We pay our interns. I'm like, if you.
Yeah, actually, software is one of the only industries, or at least it was one of the only industries that paid its interns.
Yeah, so I remember.
But it won't pay it to open source contributors.
I remember I was looking for a summer job when I was in college, and it was interesting because if you were in the humanities, you would go and you would not get paid. But I was in engineering.
Yeah, you got paid a lot.
Oh, I got paid a fortune for me at the time, which was, guess how much?
When you were in college, so that was the 40s.
We were using punch cards, and I would wheel it up to an ENIAC.
I don't know. The translation to modern amounts would kill me.
$12 an hour.
$12 an hour. Yeah, I had I think after you, I had a job at €7.50 an hour.
Yeah, well,
as a software engineer.
This was a huge step up because like work study at the time, I think I was getting like minimum wage was like $4.50 or something.
Right. So back to open source. So this idea of like paying contributors, I think it's an excellent idea, but I think that there's a lack of an organization around that happening. I had this idea a while back that someone should make a company, maybe it's a nonprofit or whatever, around getting every company that uses open source to contribute. And my idea was that every company would contribute 1% of revenue, 1% of VC dollars, and every person employed in software would contribute 1% to their annual salary, and that it would somehow be redistributed amongst the people who actually built so this was around the time that OpenSSL was a disaster, and everyone was building these empires on these crumbling foundations.
I think the trick is how do you redistribute it? Like, so go to loop back for a second. That would
be the challenge.
Yeah, like back when I was moderating the mailing list, I was part of the Lean Startup Group because this was the early days, like 2008. And this other guy had this idea that, he could get paid to volunteer. And I said, like, look, you cannot afford me. Mm-hmm. And like the amount you want to pay me is so insulting.
I wouldn't do it for cheap. I'd do it for free, but not for cheap.
Yeah, like I'm volunteering because I believed in the lean startup cause and I wanted to give back. But if you paid me $15 or $20 an hour to moderate this list, like the insults is just not worth it. I'm not doing this for the money.
I had a similar thing with this company wanted to partner with Circle CI, and it was like, well, we'll pay you $100 per lead that we get, and I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, no amount of money could be worth like, well, we're going to give you like 500 leads. We make $50,000. That's half a month. That's like 2 weeks salary or something.
Was this launched directly?
It was not.
Okay, good.
Oh, did you guys propose that? Because that's ludicrous.
No, we would not have. Yeah, no, I think the issue is what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
The issue of how to divide it up becomes very problematic.
Right. Whereas doing it free, it's like, you scratch our back, we'll scratch your back. It's like that's or there's something else in it. There's something intrinsic in it, or there's a whole lot of like promotion, et cetera.
No, like for me, for volunteering, it was like, this is my time when I give back. Like I volunteer.
Yeah, but you get something out of it.
Yeah, like I volunteer right now for my accelerator, and I give fundraising advice to a lot of people, like including people and I don't charge for that.
Well, exactly, yeah.
Like
and no one charged me for it back in the day.
Yeah, it was just like, and it would be weird if somebody...
Yeah, no one charged me, that's right. Yeah.
It would be weird if somebody said, hey, thank you.
Well, I don't know if you got this in the early days, but there are people around who are like, I will advise your company. And
stay away from them.
I think there's a category of people that do it well, and these are people who basically do it, who are experienced, who do it professionally, and who like commit to a certain number of hours and a certain number, like coaches. Not quite coaches, but something along those lines. I think that's good, but like there's a lot of shysters in the ecosystem. Yeah,
what I was trying to say is like LaunchDarkly has advisors, and there were people who were spending enough time with us that we said, hey, we should really be giving you some shares.
Yeah. Oh, for sure, yeah.
Not people who were like...
Yeah. Well, there was a point at which I needed more focused advice, and I was talking to... It wasn't quite... let's call it a business coach, for lack of a better term. And, there was an agreement, and there was cash, and there was shares, and all this sort of thing. And it didn't end up happening for a bunch of reasons, but I think there was a fair and equitable, contract being reached.
Yeah, I think this is advice I give startups. I mean, there's people who I advise for free. Mm-hmm. I just like giving back.
Yeah.
But if you're starting to ask a lot of somebody's time,
you should. You
should be comping them in some way.
Open source needs a bunch of things to make a project successful. So there were marketing, community,
product management, and a vision.
A vision, that was probably the biggest one.
Yeah.
A roadmap, a direction, and maybe some technical writers.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to this episode of To Be Continuous, brought to you by Heavybit and hosted by me, Paul Bigger of CircleCI, and Edith Harbaugh of LaunchDarkly.
To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com. While you're there, check out their library, home to great educational talks from other developer company founders and industry leaders.